That's true. Now, if not, is everybody in the room at least familiar with an anonymity network, whether they're Tor or I2P? Okay. Well, I won't go too in-depth about the technology, but I will cover briefly what they are, just as kind of a refresher for everybody. Tor and I2P are used by anybody who's looking to keep their internet activities private. There are over 2.5 million people per day that are signing on to anonymity networks. What they do is they make internet activity more difficult to be traced back to the user. But it's important to know that it's difficult, not impossible, for that activity to be traced back to the user. And some people may wonder why even leverage something like that. I really don't care if people are tracking my browsing activities, but there's a lot more about your surfing activity that could be bad if people find out about you or your organization if you're browsing to certain websites that you want to try to be covert about. The one thing that I always tell people is some individuals are willing to give up their privacy for certain conveniences. I know personally I have a Gmail account, and I'm sure, and I've seen the targeted ads that are based on the emails that are in my inbox. And to be honest, Gmail is free. It's very great to use, so I'm willing to give up certain aspects of my privacy for the convenience of that. But this is a case where certain things with my browsing, I'm not willing to give up that privacy for the conveniences of it. So I'm willing to use a service like Tor or I2P that are a little slower and a little more challenging to use because of the privacy that it provides me. Really, I don't want to tell you to use this service one way or the other. I just want you to be aware of what the tools are and how they're available to you. A lot of people just have the attitude. The most frustrating thing I think I've ever heard in information security is when people say, I'm not a target, or nobody's looking at me. And people, with whether your company, I don't care what it is you sell or what it is you do, even browsing at home, you are a target. Your information is valuable to someone, some way. I always talk in terms of browsing activity in terms of the Nielsen ratings. If everybody's familiar with that, the system that they do to try to gauge who's watching what TV show and try to gauge the advertisements to that, they used to kind of just throw darts at the wall and hope for the best, thinking, oh, you know what, it's Monday Night Football, maybe 18 to 35-year-old males are watching, let's advertise to them. But now, with the way that internet and advertising tracking takes place, you can be a lot more granular with who you're marketing to. So that information is valuable to people, and there's definitely good reasons why you may not want that information available to them. Other people that are using this material, aside from your advertisers, is your ISPs and even the websites themselves. So there is definitely information within the logs that show who you are and where you came from. For one reason or the other, you may want that information protected. Briefly, I want to discuss Tor as compared to I2P. For the purpose of this talk, I'm really going to focus more on Tor, just for the fact that it is a lot more widely used as compared to I2P. Tor stands for the Onion Router, and I2P stands for the Invisible Internet Project. I2P does seem to be growing rapidly, and I think the reason why it's growing so rapidly is just because there's less adoption of it, and people feel better about using it simply for the fact that there's less people using it. If you're wondering who developed Tor, it was actually developed by a US Naval Research Lab. And that goes to show you, from the beginning, from its inception, it wasn't necessarily designed with malicious intent. And just because people have been using it for malicious purposes doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only application for it. And that's what I want to be sure to discuss with you today. So at least when you leave here, you may think and find some reason how you could benefit from using this service. Currently, it's run by a nonprofit organization, despite the fact that it does have origins within the federal government. And that's why some criminals that do leverage it are kind of afraid to do so because of its origins. But I do think now that it is absolutely safe to use for the right purposes. Moving on, I kind of want to cover with you briefly some of the reasons why people feel the way that they do about Tor and why the way it's discussed in certain ways. And there is a lot of bad stigma associated with it. The main thing that I think of is anonymity can be used for good and bad purposes. So with that, there's reasons why people could use this for absolutely good things that help others, and there's people that use it for bad purposes, just like any other bit of technology. I always compare other tools that we use for pen testing, like Metasploit and things like that, that are leveraged by bad actors. It doesn't necessarily mean that that tool's bad. It's the people and their intent that we have to be concerned about. A reason that I can think of how anonymity has been used for a bad purpose recently, I don't know if anybody in the room is a sports fan, but there's a baseball player named Curt Schilling. He's recently retired. And on Twitter, he posted a picture of his daughter, congratulating her for getting accepted into college. He started getting a lot of people sending hate mail for some odd reason about his daughter. And these were just disgusting, vicious things that were being sent to him. And they were being sent to him under the veil of anonymity. And that is a bad reason for them to do it. I'm sure if they saw this 6'4" athlete on the street, they wouldn't be saying things about his daughter. But under the veil of anonymity, they felt that they could do it. Now, Kurt Schilling did take it to one other level and researched who these people were, despite the fact that they had an anonymous name, and some of them were fired from their employers and suspended from school. But there's also good reasons why people could benefit from being anonymous, whether they're a whistleblower, afraid to speak up about something that's going wrong, or whether they're an activist. Again, being afraid to speak up about something that's going on in their country, but they want to make it known to other people. That is a way that people benefit from being anonymous on the internet. And quite frankly, some of the reasons why Tor is thought of the way it is because there are illegal goods and services for sale over Tor. I really didn't believe it until I saw it for the first time, but it is very frightening when you see things like weapons for sale or drugs for sale over Tor. But that doesn't, again, mean that the technology is bad. It's just the way that it's being applied is bad. And I think a big part of it, too, is we end up hearing what's bad about it more often than we hear what's good. It's just the way the news works now. You know, you're not going to hear a story about an activist being able to talk about torture that's happening in a country through Tor because they feel secure about doing it. You're going to hear about a bust, such as Operation Anonymous, where international law enforcement agencies shut down 414 websites over Tor because those websites were servicing illegal goods and selling other products. So they were actually shut down. And because of that, a lot of people thought that Tor itself was compromised and insecure. Personally, I think that it was actually poor operational security that led to that and other factors, not necessarily a compromise of Tor itself. But I want to make sure that everybody knows some of the things that I'll discuss with you later of ways that you could benefit from using an anonymity network. They're not life or death circumstances. It's just ways that you could benefit from having your identity harder to find, not necessarily impossible to find. A lot of people just mentioned because after hearing about busts and things like that that have happened, websites that have been shut down, I think Silk Road, which is an online drugs marketplace that's over Tor, has been shut down 2 or 3 times. And people wonder, as a result of that, gosh, it really can't be secure. And I can understand why people have that conception. But typically, like I mentioned, the issues are caused by operational security. Whether it's somebody downloading a document, not realizing that document's going to tie back to who you are when you open it within the application. Even things like using a plugin over Tor, where that's going to expose the source IP address not necessarily being encrypted like the rest of your traffic. I'm just going to go over briefly how you can be a little more secure if you choose to use it. There are a couple methods that leverage the technology better than others. One of them is actually using the Tor browser that's provided by them, and it's just meant to use it more effectively than just using a standard browser over Tor. The other is actually to use the Tails operating system. And what that Tails operating system is, it's again just more efficiently a way of connecting to it. And you can actually boot from a flash drive as opposed to connecting directly to Tor. And with that, it leaves certain things that might expose you in your operating system and makes it more difficult to find out who you are. Again, not impossible, but just more difficult. And like I mentioned, I want to be sure to bring this up to everybody. It's not life or death circumstances that you would be accessing this information. These are ways that it would just make sense to have reasons for it to be more difficult to find you. So always keep that in mind when you're accessing this network. I will show you some circumstances in which people are using it under life or death circumstances, but I really hope nobody in this room has any reason for that anytime soon. There are some larger corporations that are currently using Tor for one reason or another. I'll briefly go over those with you because it may apply to you, it may not. You'll notice the first 2 of them are actually news organizations. And does anybody think off the top of their head how a news organization can use this? That's exactly what it is. So there is a service over Tor that's deployed as an open source application. It's called SecureDrop. The Washington Post and The Guardian, the first 2 that I mentioned here, are using that service. So what that does is it allows journalists to discreetly communicate with their sources. And for whatever reason, the source may not want to show who they are. I don't know much about journalistic integrity or things like that, what you can print, what you can't. But if you're more likely to have that source feel comfortable with communicating you, it's a great thing. Now, SecureDrop is managed by an organization called the Freedom of the Press Foundation. And they don't claim that it's 100% secure. It's important to know, but they do feel that it's better than just traditional resources. It's better than a clear text email. It's better than using your cell phone. And it's definitely an improvement over traditional methods. Another organization that is using it is The New Yorker. And similar to the Washington Post and the Guardian, they are using a version of Secure Drop. They just call their service Strongbox. But they recommend not using your home network, not using your work network to connect to that service, because they understand there's methods that could lead back to who you are. And they, again, clearly state that it's not perfect, but it's better than the traditional applications. Forbes also uses the same thing, but they call their product SafeSource. And I think what's interesting about Forbes is their SafeSource server is located in a completely separate data center from their standard operations. So again, it's just something that makes those sources feel more at ease when they're providing those communications. The next major organization is Mozilla. A lot of people are familiar with them. They may use the Firefox browser. They announced what's called the Polaris Privacy Initiative. And what that is, it's just really an attempt to pull all their privacy efforts together and try to involve some other people within the industry. A big part of what that initiative is, they're actually deploying Tor nodes within their existing infrastructure. So they're using old servers and things like that to support the growth of this network. And I think down the line they are going to deploy parts of the Tor services within their browser itself, so to make it even easier for you to access that network through their existing browser, which is already deployed very rapidly. Again, with their services, though, like I mentioned with Forbes, that infrastructure is completely separated and isolated from their production equipment because they don't want the traffic to mix, which completely makes sense. Moving on to Facebook. It actually surprises people because of a recent change they made that kind of went in the opposite direction. But Facebook recently unveiled a .onion address, which is a service to where they have their services and their Facebook social network available over Tor. What they do is they use the Tor network to hide the user's IP addresses and where their location is. But the problem with that is Facebook requires you to sign on using your actual identity. So it's still a step in the right direction, but they're not allowing true anonymous activity on their network. But at least if you are signing on to Facebook through Tor, they don't necessarily know where you're coming from. So you can see there are some organizations that are currently using it. I'm going to discuss some ways that you could possibly use it yourself. The first one I think is very important, and a lot of these centralize around research that you don't want others knowing that you're doing. And the first one is competition monitoring. Now, this may not be something traditionally in your role, whether you're an IT professional, manager, but it could be something that your marketing department is doing, or even you're doing if you're an IT services organization. You're looking to see what other platforms are out there for people to use, what your competition's doing. Are you ahead of the curve? Are you behind the curve? And I know for a fact that organizations have their web servers configured to deploy fake pages, depending on who's accessing it. So they may be spreading disinformation to you and your colleagues without you even realizing it. But accessing their page over the Tor network is one way to circumvent that, and to do true research without them seeing your IP address in their web logs, which it may be something that you care about, it may not be. A lot of these applications, they don't necessarily apply to you looking at your nephew's pictures of his dinner over Instagram. That's certain things that you don't care about people finding out about, but something like researching your competition or certain intelligence gathering. You may not want people to know about some of the confidential research that you're doing. If you have a new product you're getting ready to roll out, you don't necessarily want it well known that coming from your network's IP addresses are people researching one topic versus the other. So by using the Tor network, it's good to have that traffic somewhat anonymized. Another thing that I think is important that a lot of people overlook is if they have sensitive procurement patterns. So you may buy a lot of services from vendor A, and we really don't want it known that we're using vendor A for a lot of these services. And by masking our traffic, looking for either another provider or the fact that we're researching the secret spice that's used in all of our ingredients, we need a way to mask that it's us doing that research in certain cases. So it's important to consider that you have the ability to do that. This next one I thought was interesting, and it kind of coincides with what I mentioned to you about what the journalist organizations are doing. With Tor, you have the capability to offer truly anonymous tip lines. So if you have something within your organization, if you're of a certain size, and you want people to have the ability to talk about fraud or misuse of corporate assets or things like that, and they're normally afraid to speak up, if you deploy something over this, they have the capability to be truly anonymous. And if it's anything where they're afraid to speak up about something that's wrong, that's definitely a good use of this service, and it does kind of coincide with existing offerings and ways that it's being used. The next way that it's being used very commonly is for security breach information sharing. If for whatever reason you've been hacked or you've been targeted and you want to share that information with a provider, but you don't want it necessarily known that you're doing so and you want to do that anonymously, what a great way to send the data than making sure that your IP address is anonymized. These last two are really more technical reasons to use it, and I know as a former systems administrator and network administrator working for Brent Bigelow up there, they were things that took up a lot of my time verifying firewall rules. You know, if you need to look and see that you've blocked certain subnets from accessing a network resource, it's a great way to quickly change your IP address without connecting to another network. I know when we had in our office 2 drops, one for the external internet, one for the internal internet, it always frustrated me to drop back and forth all day to test certain things. And another reason that I had to use it very frequently, I had to change my IP address because I wanted to connect back to our deployed services. Sometimes you want to see, what does your VPN look like from the outside? What does your Citrix login page look like from the outside? By using Tor, you're able to do so without changing your connection method. It's important to know, and I know I've come back to this a lot, but not every time you hop on the internet do you need to have Tor. Not every time do you care about people looking at your browsing activity. But there are circumstances where you're going to be concerned about that. And I just want to keep that thought in your head next time you're browsing somewhere. Gosh, do I really care if somebody knows about this? Does it hurt me or my company if somebody knows I'm searching for this topic? So it's important to consider that and just know you have this technology available to you to use it for those circumstances. If anybody has any questions, we can keep this open at the end. If you have something you want to talk to me later, I'm available over Twitter. And my email address is just aluck@microsolve.com. Anybody have any questions now?
So accessing Tor and browsing activities also can get you monitored too, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is very possible.
Piece to that I was just thinking about.
Yeah, and you know, if I'm sure I'm on somebody's list at some intelligence agency that knows I access the Tor network, but again, it goes back to the fact I'm doing nothing that requires law enforcement to look into what I'm doing. Everything I'm doing over that's legal. And as long as you use it with legal applications, you have nothing to worry about. But yeah, it may open some eyes to you, without a doubt.
That was the piece where you said it's not necessarily secure because where you come from is from your home network, and that kind of makes you fairly well exposed right from the beginning. If it's Starbucks or somewhere else, going from a thumb drive, that gives you a little more potential on your money anyway.
Right, without a doubt. Any other questions? Yes? A lot of that technology had a lot of bad issues with it, and especially with that Kickstarter campaign, I can't remember where it was manufactured. Yeah. So there is a problem with that from the beginning, that the people manufacturing the product really had no affiliation with the Tor network, so it wasn't optimized properly. And really, if you're using a thing like the Tor browser or the Tails operating system, you really have no need to use the router, because you can just have that from your machine level.
These are routers that are instrumented with Tor, specifically to access.
Exactly. And a lot of things people don't realize when they use that router is not all of the traffic on those go through Tor. It's really only TCP. So if you have certain UDP connections, they're still going through that router under your normal IP address. So it doesn't necessarily encrypt and use everything. And one question I'm commonly asked when talked about Tor is, people wonder, is it better than a VPN? Because if you think about it, you could use a VPN for the same reasons. A VPN does mask where you're coming from. But the only problem is, the VPN provider really has all of your capabilities there. They can look and see what you're doing. And a lot of VPN providers, they sell their services cheap, but not only is it slow, but they've been deploying malware and selling your browsing activity, which kind of defeats the purpose.
You mentioned Tor being used for reaching talking to people about your location and you want to track that it happened. Anonymous as possible. Are any of the major incident response organizations like CERT, ICS, CERT, for instance, using this tool? Have they offered it up to their communities as a way for them without organization with minimal liability for them to talk about the reality of their environment?
I know personally, as a former systems and network administrator, I'd feel more comfortable communicating over those means about my organization. I'd be willing to share more facts if I could hide certain things like that, but to my knowledge, nobody's using it that way, and I think it'd be an effective way to use it.
Yeah, but information sharing is what it's all about. Companies aren't going to do that if they're going to get sued or held accountable by their shareholders or somebody.
Right.
So they're going to shut up, which means everyone's going to be screwed up. The only way to fix that is to communicate. If you don't know of any sanctioned organizations actually using this key for that type of information.
Unfortunately, no, but I think it'd be a great way to do so.
What do we have
Tor super users, guys that really understand it, that might be able to compromise our information without us knowing.
The main concern I have with Tor, aside from the services that are available over it, is it's being used in malware a lot now. Because all the threat actors really try to do day by day is hide their identities and where they are, where they're coming from. So gosh, if you have a CNC server and you deploy it as a Tor service, it's pretty tough to trace back who you are. It's better than running a proxy at a network that you just have to trash with Tor. It can take people a long time to find out who you are. Now, as far as actually accessing Tor, I think you have the same fears that you do over the standard internet. It has happened. People, I don't remember what the organization was, not Anonymous, the other smaller kind of grassroots hacktivist organization, they tried unsuccessfully. They were able to find out pretty clearly these relays were being maintained by somebody else and they still didn't have the correct encryption keys. Yeah.
The nature of Tor itself is very designed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Any other questions? Well, again, if you come up with something later or you really need help getting on the Tor network, feel free to send me a tweet or send me an email. But thank you guys all very much for your time.